The morning sun climbed lazily over the skyline of Havenbrook, a once vibrant city now wrapped in the quiet fatigue of economic struggle. Among the narrow streets and fading murals stood a modest community arts center painted in bright yellows and blues that had long since lost their shine. Inside, Elena Carter hurried across the scuffed wooden floors with a clipboard in one hand and paint stains smudged on her sleeve. She had promised the children of Havenbrook one more exhibition before the year ended, even if it meant skipping meals and working late into the night. To her, the community center was more than brick and mortar. It was a promise that art could still heal a city bruised by greed and neglect. That morning, however, everything seemed to conspire against her. The power had flickered out twice, the shipment of canvases was delayed again, and the local bakery had canceled the food donation for their weekend fundraiser. Still, Elena refused to surrender to frustration. She told herself, as she always did, that things only truly broke when people stopped believing they could fix them. Slinging her worn-out bag across her shoulder, she locked the door and stepped into the chill of early spring air, her sneakers brushing against the puddles left by last night's rain. At the same moment, across town, Devon Ashford adjusted the cuffs of his designer suit as he prepared to leave the glass tower of Ashford Enterprises, the empire he had inherited at 28. He was the type of man who made silence follow him into a room, not because of menace but because of the weight of certainty he carried. His company portfolio gleamed with luxury hotels, high-tech investments, and property developments that reshaped skylines. To many, he was brilliance personified. To others, he was arrogance sculpted into human form. Devon had never believed in luck or sentiment. The world to him was an equation of effort, timing, and power, and he was a man who liked all variables under his control. That illusion of control would shatter before lunchtime. Traffic crawled along Havenbrook's Central Avenue, a chaos of honking horns and restless drivers. Devon, impatient as ever, guided his crimson Ferrari 812 superfast through the lanes, weaving with precision that bordered on recklessness. He was late for a board meeting with foreign investors, the kind of meeting that could yield millions if he impressed them. The world blurred past, street markets, food trucks, a small school where children laughed in bright uniforms, and he felt detached from it all. He existed above ordinary life, insulated by money and speed. Elena was stepping off the curb at that same intersection, clutching 2 boxes of donated paints, when the roar of Devon's engine split the air. It wasn't just loud, it was the kind of sound that made hearts jolt and instincts flare. A group of children were crossing with their teacher a few steps ahead. Elena's eyes widened. The car was coming too fast. Without thinking, she dropped the boxes, paint tubes scattering like confetti across the asphalt. She scanned the nearby construction site, spotted a loose piece of brick and seized it with trembling fingers. Anger and fear fused into one motion. She hurled it. The brick struck the Ferrari's windshield with a dull, resonant crack. Time seemed to stop. Tires screamed, smoke coiled upward, and the car halted just short of the crosswalk. The children squealed and scrambled backward. Elena stood frozen, chest heaving, heart pounding as if it would burst from her ribs. She hadn't planned to do it. Her body had simply acted faster than her mind. The driver's door opened with deliberate force. Devon Ashford stepped out, his expression a storm contained behind an immaculate face. His tailored jacket caught the sunlight as he approached, disbelief flickering into fury. "Are you out of your mind?" His voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Elena straightened, her knees still weak but her resolve hardening. "Are you blind?" She fired back, pointing toward the children who huddled behind their teacher. "You were speeding through a school zone." "I was not near those kids," he snapped. "Do you even know who—" "I don't care who you are," she interrupted, her voice rising above the murmuring crowd now gathering with phones lifted. "You could have killed someone." Devon stared at her as though she had spoken in a language he didn't recognize. People didn't shout at him. They deferred, negotiated, or apologized. This woman, with paint in her hair and a torn jacket, was lecturing him in the middle of the street. For a moment he saw his own reflection in her furious eyes, an image he didn't like. When she refused to back down, his composure cracked. "You've just damaged a $200,000 car." "You almost damaged a dozen lives," she replied, crossing her arms. "Cars can be repaired. People can't." The crowd cheered softly at that, sensing a rare reversal of power. Devon's jaw clenched. The cameras were watching. His family's name was watching. Everything he had built relied on image, and right now that image was being dismantled by a stranger. He turned away before the heat in his chest could spill into words he might regret. "You'll hear from my lawyers," he said coldly, sliding back into the driver's seat and speeding off. Slower this time. Elena exhaled only when the engine's echo faded. Her hands trembled as adrenaline drained away. The teacher, Mrs. Lopez, placed a hand on her shoulder. "You saved them, dear. That car would have hit the crosswalk in seconds." I didn't even think," Elena murmured. "Sometimes courage doesn't think," the teacher replied softly. By afternoon, Elena's small act of defiance had traveled farther than she could have imagined. A teenager from the crowd had uploaded the confrontation to social media with the caption, "Ordinary woman stands up to reckless millionaire." Within hours, it spread like wildfire. The video painted Elena as a local hero and Devon as the symbol of unchecked privilege. Donations flooded the community center's website. Reporters called for interviews. Her inbox overflowed with messages of support, admiration, and a few threats from anonymous accounts defending the billionaire. Elena wanted none of it. She was grateful for the donations, yes, but the attention made her uneasy. She didn't crave fame. She just wanted to keep her art programs alive. Her assistant, Marcus Trent, however, was practically glowing. "Elena, we've raised $8,000 in one day. This could save the center. Or ruin it," she sighed. "The internet loves you today and forgets you tomorrow. We can't depend on trending outrage." Yet somewhere across the city, in a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows, Devon Ashford replayed the same video in silence. He watched himself step out of the Ferrari, watched her confront him without fear, watched his own arrogance captured frame by frame. His PR director had already called twice. The board was worried. Investors were unsettled. In less than 12 hours, his name had become a cautionary headline. "Billionaire nearly hits schoolchildren, saved by local hero." Devon had weathered scandals before, but this one stung differently. Maybe it was the clarity in her voice, the way she hadn't cared about his money or his name. She had looked at him as a man, not an empire, and found him lacking. By the next morning, 3 lawyers were dispatched to the Havenbrook Community Center with a settlement proposal. They arrived in crisp suits carrying tablets and confidence. Elena received them in her cramped office, where the smell of acrylic paint lingered. "Miss Carter," began the lead attorney, "our client, Mr. Ashford, is prepared to drop all claims for the damage to his vehicle." Elena leaned back, cautious. "That's generous. What's the catch?" The lawyer smiled thinly and slid a folder across the desk. Inside were photographs and headlines. Devon Ashford at galas and tabloids alongside actresses and models. "Mr. Ashford's reputation has suffered due to this recent event. He wishes to correct the public narrative. You've become a symbol of integrity. He, unfortunately, has not. We propose a mutually beneficial arrangement." Her brow furrowed. "What kind of arrangement?" "You will accompany Mr. Ashford to public events, participate in interviews, perhaps share charitable initiatives together. Appear to be close. In return, Mr. Ashford will personally fund your community center for the next 2 years, including full renovations." Elena stared at them, stunned. "You want me to pretend to date him?" "Think of it as image rehabilitation," the lawyer replied smoothly. "Both of you could gain from this. Your cause gets exposure and funding. His reputation gains humility." Elena felt her cheeks flush, a mix of disbelief and indignation. "Do you realize how insulting that is? You think I can be bought like a billboard?" "Miss Carter, it's an offer, not an order." "Well, here's my answer," she said, standing up, voice trembling but firm. "Tell Mr. Ashford that Havenbrook's children may need money, but their mentor still has pride. I won't be anyone's prop." The lawyers exchanged looks, packed their documents, and left. When the door shut, Elena slumped into her chair, exhaustion washing over her. She glanced at the cracked window where sunlight filtered through. Could she really afford to reject that kind of support? The roof leaked every time it rained. The heating barely worked. She was holding the center together with faith and duct tape. That night, long after the city had gone quiet, a black sedan pulled up outside the community center. Devon stepped out, no entourage, no camera crew, just a man in a simple dark coat holding a check folded inside an envelope. He hesitated before knocking. his reflection wavering in the glass door. He didn't know what he expected. Maybe to prove something, maybe to apologize. Elena opened the door, surprised and wary. "Mr. Ashford?" "Devon," he corrected softly. "May I come in?" She hesitated, then nodded. The center was dim, lit only by a few desk lamps. Paintings by the local children covered the walls. Bright suns, crooked trees, smiling faces. Devon looked around, genuinely moved by the innocence in every brushstroke. "So this is what you fight for," he murmured. "This is what they fight for," she replied. "I just try to keep the lights on." He handed her the envelope. "There's a donation. No strings attached. I owe you that much." She unfolded the check. The amount made her throat tighten. "Why?" "Because you were right," he said quietly. "Money can fix cars, not lives." For the first time, Elena saw not the billionaire from magazine covers, but a man standing awkwardly in a room that didn't belong to his world. "You didn't need to come yourself," she said. "Maybe I did," he admitted. As they stood in that fragile silence surrounded by children's art, something shifted. A recognition that beneath anger and pride were two people bound by a single act neither could undo. Outside, rain began to fall again, tapping softly against the windows. Neither of them noticed the flicker of a streetlight or the faint glow of a phone camera from across the road capturing this unexpected meeting. By morning, the world would once again have opinions, loud, endless opinions. But for now, in that quiet heartbeat of shared understanding, Elena Carter and Devon Ashford took the first hesitant step toward a story neither of them could have predicted. The next morning began with a storm of voices, notifications and flashing screens that Elena Carter had not asked for. Her meeting with Devon the previous night, private, sincere, and brief, had somehow become public property. A passerby's blurry video showed Devon Ashford standing at the community center's entrance, handing her an envelope, their faces solemn in the rain. The internet wasted no time turning it into a story of its own. Billionaire seeks redemption from woman who defied him. By noon, news outlets were replaying it under dramatic captions, and Elena's phone was vibrating relentlessly on her desk. She sat in her office surrounded by art supplies and unopened mail, feeling the weight of attention pressing down like a physical thing. She hadn't wanted fame. She wanted quiet stability. But life, she was learning, rarely waited for permission. Marcus, her ever-enthusiastic assistant, burst into the room with his tablet in hand. "You need to see this," he said, grinning in disbelief. The screen showed a trending clip of a television anchor, speculating about her unlikely connection with Devon Ashford. "They're saying he's making amends," Marcus added. "Some are calling you the woman who humbled a tycoon. This could be huge for donations." Elena rubbed her temples, trying to steady her thoughts. "Marcus, this kind of attention doesn't last and it always costs something." "Maybe," he said, "but for once the world is listening. Maybe it's time we use that noise for good." She wanted to argue, but when she looked at the peeling paint on the walls and the faded posters of past art programs, she hesitated. The truth was they needed help. Pride could feed dignity, but it couldn't repair roofs or buy brushes. Across the city, inside a high-rise office overlooking the river, Devon stared at the same video, his jaw tight and expression unreadable. His publicist, Claire Holloway, was pacing the room, her tone brisk and pragmatic. "Devon, we need to control this narrative before it controls you. People think this is your redemption arc. Let's give them one. You've already reached out privately. Now we go public. We show you supporting her cause, sponsoring her programs, attending community events. Make this partnership official, polished, and mutually beneficial." He leaned back, eyes fixed on the skyline. "You mean turn it into a performance?" "I mean turn it into an opportunity," she countered. "Public perception is power. You have the chance to rebuild yours and actually do something meaningful in the process." For the first time in years, Devon hesitated before a business decision. He thought of Elena's defiant eyes, the way she had stood her ground without caring who he was. It wasn't pity that stirred him. It was curiosity, maybe even admiration. She had no angle, no interest in his wealth, no pretense. She had confronted him as one human to another. He found that disarming, almost liberating. "Set it up," he said finally, "but we do this my way." 2 days later, the community center buzzed with reporters and volunteers preparing for a scheduled press conference. Marcus could hardly contain his excitement, but Elena's stomach churned with unease. She had agreed to meet Devon again only after a polite but persistent request from his assistant, promising that he wanted to make a genuine contribution and not a spectacle. She prayed that was true. When the black sedan pulled up outside, every camera pivoted like sunflowers toward light. Devon emerged wearing a charcoal suit. No entourage this time, just calm determination. The crowd fell silent as he walked up the steps toward Elena, who waited at the door with her arms crossed, unsure whether to thank him or scold him again. "Miss Carter," he greeted, voice measured. "Thank you for seeing me." "Elena," she corrected softly. "You didn't have to come with cameras." "I didn't invite them," he said, glancing at the reporters. "But since they're here, maybe we can tell them something worth hearing." He stepped to the microphone set up near the entrance, and for the first time, the world saw a different Devon Ashford, not the polished tycoon or the defensive millionaire, but a man speaking without a script. "A few days ago," he began, "I made a mistake, one that could have hurt people who didn't deserve it. I was careless and I was called out for it. That wake-up call came from someone who didn't owe me anything yet showed me what responsibility looks like." He turned slightly toward Elena, his gaze steady. "Miss Carter reminded me that no amount of success excuses arrogance. So today, I'm not here to fix an image. I'm here to fix what neglect has broken. I'm pledging 2 years of funding to keep this community center open and thriving. Art saved me once when I was young and angry. Maybe it can save others too." The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, questions flew, and for a fleeting moment even Elena forgot her skepticism. The sincerity in his voice had caught her off guard. It wasn't rehearsed, it was raw, almost vulnerable. When the noise finally subsided, she stepped up beside him. "We'll hold you to that promise, Mr. Ashford," she said, half smiling. "And maybe we'll teach you to paint while you're at it." The laughter that followed broke the tension, and for the first time, they looked at each other not as enemies but as unlikely allies. Over the next few weeks, their worlds began to intertwine in ways neither had planned. Devon visited the center regularly, sometimes staying late to help organize art exhibits or review budget plans. He didn't know how to blend in. His expensive watch and reserved demeanor always set him apart, but he tried, and Elena noticed. He watched her interact with children, her patience endless, her laugh contagious. She watched him struggle to hold a paintbrush correctly, his perfectionism at war with creativity, and secretly found it endearing. Rumors, of course, bloomed like wildflowers in the cracks of public curiosity. Tabloids printed photos of them together, at charity dinners, at local events, even once in a candid moment when she brushed dust from his sleeve. Headlines declared, "From Fury to Fiancé," Ashford's heartwarming turnaround. Elena rolled her eyes at every one of them, but she couldn't ignore how donations kept rising. The community center, once on the brink of closure, was now bustling with energy, laughter, and renewed hope. Yet with every success came a shadow of doubt. One evening, as she locked up after another long day, she found Devon waiting outside, leaning against his car, the streetlight casting a soft halo over him. "You should get some rest," he said gently. "I could say the same to you," she replied, pocketing her keys. "You've been here almost every night this week. Aren't billionaires supposed to be on yachts or something?" He chuckled, the sound rare and genuine. "Maybe I'm tired of yachts. Maybe I like this better. Helping people? Feeling human," he said quietly. The simplicity of that answer unsettled her. She wanted to believe him, but part of her still guarded her heart. "Be careful," she said, trying to mask her concern with humor. "You're starting to sound like one of us. Maybe that's not such a bad thing." Days turned into weeks, and what began as a transaction slowly became transformation. Devon's board of directors couldn't understand it, why their sharp, calculating CEO was spending hours painting murals with children or volunteering at food drives. But Devon didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt present. There was something about the raw authenticity of the community center, the chipped walls, the laughter, the purpose, that stripped away the armor he had built around himself. Elena, on the other hand, found herself conflicted. She admired his dedication, yet she feared the line between gratitude and affection blurring. She reminded herself daily that he was a man of different worlds, and hers had already broken too many promises. But every time he looked at her with that quiet steadiness, something within her wavered. Their fragile balance was tested one evening when Devon invited her to accompany him to a major fundraising gala for underprivileged schools. "You should be there," he insisted. "You've earned the spotlight more than I have." "I'm not made for red carpets," she protested. "Neither am I," he said, offering his hand. "Maybe we'll survive it together." The night of the gala was a blur of lights, music, and whispered curiosity. Elena looked stunning in a borrowed navy gown, her hair swept back simply, while Devon's gaze never strayed far from her. They drew attention as expected, but for once it wasn't scandal that followed them. It was admiration. They spoke about art programs, community development, and the importance of empathy and leadership. By the end of the evening, donations for public art education had tripled. But fame's light is fickle, and not everyone welcomed this alliance. The following week, an anonymous article surfaced online accusing Elena of exploiting her relationship with Devon for personal gain. The piece was cruel, laced with insinuations that cut deeper than she expected. She read it alone, sitting in her darkened office, the glow of the monitor washing her pale face. Every sentence felt like a betrayal of the truth she was living, a truth built on struggle, sincerity, and sacrifice. When Devon found her the next morning, she was quiet, her eyes heavy. "You saw it," he said softly. "I did. I'll have my lawyers handle it." "Don't," she said firmly. "Let them talk. We know who we are." He studied her face, searching for anger or bitterness, but found only tired grace. "You shouldn't have to be this strong all the time," he murmured. "Someone has to be," she replied. "You can't paint hope if you don't believe in it." That night, Devon sat in his penthouse staring at the city below. For the first time, wealth felt meaningless. He could buy silence, control headlines, and own half the skyline, but he couldn't erase the look of quiet resilience in Elena's eyes. She wasn't a headline. She was a mirror, reflecting the man he wanted to be but wasn't yet. Weeks later, the center hosted its largest art fair yet, a celebration of youth creativity funded entirely by Ashford Enterprises. Children ran between booths displaying paintings and sculptures, laughter filling the air. As Elena moved through the crowd, she caught sight of Devon helping a young boy hang his canvas higher. The boy was missing one arm, but the joy on his face as Devon lifted him was enough to make Elena's eyes sting. When Devon turned, their gazes met. He smiled, not the polished smile of a CEO, but something warm and unguarded. In that instant, she understood that the arrogant man from the Ferrari had disappeared somewhere between brushstrokes and humility. The fair ended with music and confetti, the night humming with triumph. As the crowd dispersed, Elena and Devon stood beneath the string lights outside the center, the world around them soft and golden. "You did good," she said quietly. "We did good," he corrected. Together. She hesitated, then reached out, brushing a fleck of paint from his sleeve. "Maybe you're not as hopeless as I thought." "Careful," he teased. "You might start liking me. Don't push your luck, Mr. Ashford." But she was smiling, and he was smiling, and somewhere in that shared silence, the distance between their worlds began to disappear. What neither of them knew was that fate had already begun weaving its next twist, a challenge that would test every fragile truth they had built. The story of redemption, it seemed, was far from over. The weeks that followed the art fair felt like sunlight after a long storm. The Havenbrook Community Center, once on the edge of closure, had become a symbol of hope and renewal. Every day, children poured in carrying brushes, clay, and dreams. Laughter filled rooms that had once echoed with uncertainty. Even the building itself seemed brighter, its once faded walls now covered in murals painted by young hands. For Elena Carter, the transformation felt almost miraculous, though she never allowed herself to forget how fragile miracles could be. Devon Ashford had become an unexpected fixture in that world. His sleek car was now a familiar sight outside the community center, and the children had long stopped being intimidated by his presence. They greeted him with paint-stained fingers and called him Mr. D, a nickname that amused them and secretly softened him. He was no longer the man who lived by numbers and deadlines alone. He had learned the patience of watching a child's first attempt at painting the sky, and he had discovered that not every masterpiece needed perfection. Sometimes, it just needed heart. But success, as Elena knew, always attracted shadows. Rumors began to circulate in the business press that Devon's sudden philanthropy was not as noble as it appeared. An anonymous source claimed that his charitable donations were a smokescreen to cover a controversial corporate project, a luxury real estate development planned on the outskirts of Havenbrook that would displace hundreds of low-income families. The article spread like wildfire. Elena read it late one night in her office, the hum of the vending machine the only sound around her. The headline burned in her mind: Ashford's charity or cover-up? The truth behind the billionaire's redemption. She felt her stomach twist. She wanted to believe it wasn't true, but she had seen enough of the world to know that good deeds often hid profit. When Devon arrived at the center the next morning, he found her waiting for him, arms folded, face pale but resolute. "Tell me it's not true," she said before he could speak. He frowned. "What's not true?" "The Havenbrook development project. The one that's going to tear down the housing district near the river. The one that will leave families homeless." Devon hesitated, a moment too long. Her eyes hardened. "So it is true?" "It's not that simple," he said carefully. "That project was approved years before you and I met. It's meant to revitalize the area, bring jobs, improve infrastructure, by destroying people's homes." She interrupted sharply. "By erasing the very community you're pretending to save?" He took a step closer, his voice low and controlled. "Elena, listen to me. I didn't design that plan, but I can influence how it's carried out. I can make it fairer." "Fairer?" she echoed bitterly. "You think money can justify everything, don't you? You think as long as there's profit at the end, the means don't matter." "I thought you were changing, Devon," he exhaled, frustration creeping into his tone. "And I thought you were capable of seeing nuance. I'm not your villain, Elena. Not every decision in business is black or white." The silence that followed was thick with disappointment. For weeks they had worked side by side, building something that felt real, something that bridged two worlds. But in that moment, all she could see was the chasm between them widening again. "I need some time," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I can't stand beside someone who might be hurting the people I'm trying to protect." He wanted to reach out, to explain that she didn't understand the full story, but her eyes, those honest, fierce eyes, made it clear that words would not heal this. He nodded once, a gesture of resignation, and walked away. The following days unfolded in slow motion. The media feasted on the tension, spinning tales of betrayal and hypocrisy. Reporters camped outside the community center. Headlines shifted from romantic speculation to moral outrage. Elena Carter cuts ties with Ashford Enterprises amid scandal. Donations began to dwindle. Sponsors pulled back, afraid of association with controversy. Elena tried to keep the programs running, but the stress was relentless. She spent nights alone in the center, painting in silence just to quiet her thoughts. She missed his calm presence more than she wanted to admit. The way he'd bring her coffee without asking. The way he'd listen when she ranted about funding and logistics. The way his eyes softened when he watched the children paint. But she reminded herself that trust once cracked could not be easily mended. Devon, meanwhile, faced his own reckoning. His board demanded explanations. Investors threatened to withdraw. He could have salvaged his reputation by issuing a statement, by distancing himself from Elena, by shifting blame. But he didn't. Instead, he ordered an internal review of the Havenbrook project. For the first time in his career, he questioned not just the outcome, but the cost. Late one evening, he visited the development site. The construction had already begun. Bulldozers lined the edge of what had once been a small park. He walked the dirt path alone, his expensive shoes sinking into the mud. He saw the old apartment buildings marked for demolition, the laundry still hanging from windows, the graffiti that read, "We belong here." A small boy watched him from behind a chain-link fence, clutching a soccer ball. Devon met the boy's eyes, and something inside him broke, the same way his windshield had cracked that first day he met Elena. He knew then what he had to do. The next morning, news outlets buzzed with a story no one expected. Ashford Enterprises halts Havenbrook project indefinitely. In his statement, Devon announced a complete restructuring of the plan, pledging to rebuild the area as affordable housing co-owned by local residents. It was a decision that shocked his shareholders and cost him millions, but it was the first time he felt peace in his own conscience. When Elena heard the news, she didn't know what to feel. Gratitude, guilt, confusion, all tangled together. She hadn't expected him to listen, let alone take such a bold step. Still, she hesitated to reach out. Part of her feared it was another gesture of control, another attempt to win admiration. Yet a quiet voice inside whispered that perhaps he truly had changed. 2 days later, as she was locking up after an evening art class, she turned to find him standing at the gate again, his coat dusted with rain. He looked tired, older somehow, but his eyes carried that same steady light she remembered. "You really did it," she said softly. "I had to," he replied. "I couldn't talk about building communities while destroying one. You didn't have to do it for me." "I didn't," he said. "I did it because for the first time in my life, someone made me see what mattered." Elena looked at him, her heart caught between pride and forgiveness. "You lost a lot because of that decision," he smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I gained something better." There was a long pause, filled only by the sound of rain tapping on the metal fence. Then, without planning it, she stepped forward and hugged him. It wasn't a romantic gesture, it was something deeper, the kind of embrace that says, "Thank you, I see you, and maybe I believe in you again." He hesitated for a moment, then wrapped his arms around her. For the first time since their fight, the air between them felt clear, but peace never lasted long in their world. The very next day, Elena received a letter from the city council. An investigation had been launched into the community center's finances. Someone had reported misuse of charitable funds. The accusation was absurd. Elena kept meticulous records, but the timing was cruel. The same people who had once celebrated her were now whispering doubts. When Devon found out, his first instinct was to intervene, to use his lawyers, his influence, his name. But when he told her, she refused. "No," she said firmly. "If I let you fix this, people will think I really did something wrong. I have to fight this myself." "Then I'll stand beside you," he said simply, and he did. The investigation dragged on for weeks, draining their energy and testing their faith. Every file, every receipt, every transaction was examined. The media returned, vultures circling what they hoped would be a downfall. But through it all, Elena refused to break. Her strength drew others to her, the volunteers, the parents, the children. They rallied behind her, holding signs outside the city hall that read, "Art belongs to everyone." Devon watched from the crowd, proud and humbled all at once. He had spent his life believing that power came from wealth. Now he saw it in a woman standing on the courthouse steps, defending the truth with nothing but her voice. In the end, the investigation cleared her completely. The accusations were traced back to a rival developer, angry at Devon's decision to halt the Havenbrook project. The truth came out and public opinion swung again, this time harder, fiercer, more loyal than before. The day the verdict was announced, the entire community center erupted in celebration. Children danced in the halls, volunteers cheered, and Marcus brought out a cake shaped like a paint palette. Amid the laughter, Devon pulled Elena aside to the quiet hallway near the art studio. "You did it?" he said softly. "No," she replied, smiling through tears. "We did it." He looked at her for a long moment, the noise of the celebration fading behind them. "Elena, I've spent my life chasing things that never made me feel alive. Money, success, prestige, they were noise. But you made me remember what purpose feels like." She swallowed hard, her heart pounding. "Devon," he took her hand gently. "You don't have to say anything, just know that whatever comes next, I want to be part of it. Not as your sponsor, not as your savior, but as someone who finally understands what matters." For a moment, words failed her. The air between them shimmered with everything unspoken. Gratitude, affection, the quiet possibility of love. Then the children burst into the hallway, shouting for them to join the celebration, and the spell broke. But the feeling lingered, deep and undeniable. That night, as she stood by the window watching the city lights flicker in the distance, Elena realized how far they had both come, from anger and pride to trust and compassion. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time she wasn't afraid of it, because sometimes the most broken beginnings led to the most beautiful continuations. And somewhere across town, in a quiet apartment far from the noise of his old life, Devon looked at a small painting one of the children had given him, a rough watercolor of a red Ferrari surrounded by smiling faces. Beneath it, in messy handwriting, were the words, "People can change." He smiled, and for once, he believed it. The winter that settled over Havenbrook that year felt different. Not the cold, gray season of silence it had been in the past, but a quiet, reflective calm. The snow softened the city's edges, blanketing its scars in white, and for the first time in a long time, the world seemed to breathe again. The community center glowed like a lantern in the heart of that winter, a place of warmth and laughter where art and kindness continued to bloom, even as frost painted the windows. Inside, children painted with mittened hands, and volunteers brought hot cocoa that steamed against the chill. It had become not just a center, but a heartbeat for the city. Elena Carter stood by the window of her small office, watching the first snowflakes drift past the glass. Her reflection stared back at her, older somehow, but stronger. So much had changed in just a few months. The scandal, the investigation, the victory that followed. It had all left invisible marks on her, reshaping who she was. She still worked tirelessly, still put the children and the community first. But something else had quietly found a place in her heart, a calm awareness of the man who had stood beside her through it all. Devon Ashford had changed more than anyone could have predicted. The once arrogant businessman now divided his time between board meetings and volunteer projects. His name, once synonymous with greed, had become a symbol of reform. Investors and critics alike couldn't make sense of him anymore. He was no longer predictable. But those who knew him closely understood that this transformation had not been born of strategy, but of something far deeper. It had begun the day a woman with paint on her hands had dared to tell him he was wrong, and it had grown with every moment of truth that followed. Devon visited the center that morning, carrying 2 boxes filled with new supplies, brushes, sketchbooks, and paint tubes in every color imaginable. He found Elena in her office and smiled as she turned to greet him. "You're early," she said, her lips curving into a soft smile. "Old habits," he replied, setting the boxes down. "I used to start my mornings with stock reports. Now I start them here. It feels better," she laughed, shaking her head. "You're getting sentimental, Mr. Ashford." "Maybe I finally have something worth being sentimental about." The air between them warmed with unspoken emotion, a quiet comfort that no longer needed to be explained. Over time, their connection had grown beyond gratitude and admiration. It had become something deeper, a thread of understanding that wove through every shared silence, every glance, every unguarded laugh. As the weeks passed, they worked side by side, preparing for the community's winter gala, a fundraising event that would celebrate their success and secure the center's future for another year. The children rehearsed performances, the volunteers decorated, and the entire town seemed to come alive with anticipation. For Elena, it wasn't just about raising money. It was about showing Havenbrook what hope looked like when people stood together. Yet beneath the excitement, an unfamiliar anxiety lingered in her chest. She had grown so used to building walls, against disappointment, against betrayal, that allowing herself to trust someone again felt both beautiful and terrifying. And Devon, for all his sincerity, still carried the shadow of a world she didn't fully understand. She had seen what power could do to people. She had lived through its consequences. Could she really believe that he had left that world behind for good? That question haunted her quietly as the night of the gala approached. The event was held in the restored City Hall, transformed into a winter wonderland of twinkling lights and music. Guests arrived in elegant coats and scarves, their laughter echoing through the marble halls. Devon stood near the entrance, greeting donors and volunteers with a grace that came naturally to him now. When Elena walked in, wearing a simple dark green gown that brought out the warmth in her eyes, the room seemed to tilt slightly. She wasn't adorned with jewels or extravagance, but there was something about her presence that drew every gaze. Devon caught his breath when he saw her, momentarily forgetting the crowd. "You look," he began, searching for the right word. "Presentable?" she teased. "Unforgettable," he said softly. And she looked away, her cheeks warming. Throughout the evening, they moved like 2 halves of a rhythm, working the room, speaking about the center, answering questions about the programs and the children's art exhibit. Every so often, their eyes would meet across the room, and for a brief heartbeat, the noise would fade, leaving only the quiet understanding between them. By the end of the night, the event had surpassed every goal they'd set. Donations poured in, promises of long-term support secured. The future of the Havenbrook Community Center was safe. As the crowd began to disperse, the band played one last slow melody, and Devon approached Elena with a hesitant smile. "Dance with me," he said. She laughed softly. I don't dance. Neither do I, he said, offering his hand. But we've done harder things together. Reluctantly, she placed her hand in his, and he guided her to the center of the room. They moved awkwardly at first, both too self-conscious, but as the music swelled, the awkwardness melted away. His hand rested lightly on her back. Her head found a place near his shoulder. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to stop thinking, to simply feel. It was only a dance, but to both of them, it felt like the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. However, fate, as always, had its own plans. The following week brought news that would once again test everything they had built. One of Devon's former business partners, a man named Victor Kane, resurfaced with documents accusing Devon of financial misconduct during the early years of his company. The allegations were old but serious, suggesting that Devon had manipulated contracts to undercut smaller developers, a story the press devoured with glee. The timing was merciless, arriving just when public trust had begun to heal. Within hours, the media turned hostile again. Headlines screamed betrayal. Television hosts debated whether Devon's redemption had been nothing more than an act. Protesters appeared outside his offices demanding accountability. And inevitably whispers reached the community center. Elena felt her world tilt as she read the headlines. She wanted to believe it was false. She did believe it. But the pain of past disappointment whispered caution. When Devon arrived at the center later that day, she was waiting for him in the studio, surrounded by children's paintings that suddenly seemed too fragile. I know what it looks like, he began quietly. I don't care what it looks like, she said, cutting him off. I want the truth. He met her eyes, the weight of his past heavy in his expression. Years ago I made mistakes, nothing illegal but unethical. I was young, ambitious, careless. I pushed people out of deals, manipulated outcomes, told myself it was just business. Victor was one of those people. I thought I'd buried that part of my life, but I guess it was waiting for its moment to come back. Elena's heart sank. You said you'd changed. I have, he said, his voice breaking slightly. But I can't erase who I was. She turned away, fighting the ache rising in her chest. I stood up for you, Devon. I believed in you when everyone else doubted. Tell me I wasn't wrong to do that. He stepped closer, his voice soft but steady. You weren't wrong. You saw the man I want to be, not the man I was. I'm still trying to live up to that. Her silence lingered, heavy and trembling. Part of her wanted to run, to protect herself from another heartbreak. But another part, the part that had always believed in second chances, held her still. I need time, she whispered. I'll give you all the time you need, he said. And then he left, not looking back. Days turned into weeks. The investigation into the old contracts revealed that Devon had indeed acted ruthlessly in his early career. But no laws had been broken. Still, public trust wavered. Investors distanced themselves and his company's stock plummeted. Through it all, Devon refused to hide. He faced the criticism head-on, admitting his past actions and pledging to repair the harm he'd caused. It was an act of humility that stunned even his harshest critics. Elena watched from afar, torn between heartbreak and pride. She saw how he stood in press conferences without excuses, how he publicly apologized to those he'd wronged, how he used his own fortune to compensate small businesses that had suffered from his past deals. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He earned it. And in that process, she realized something profound. Real change wasn't about being perfect. It was about being honest enough to confront your imperfection. One evening, as snow fell softly over the quiet streets, Devon found himself standing once more outside the community center. It was late. The lights were dim and the air was heavy with memory. He didn't know if she'd still want to see him, but something in him needed to try. Elena opened the door before he could knock, as if she had been expecting him all along. I heard the board forced you to step down, she said gently. They did, he admitted. It's strange. I thought I'd feel empty without it, but I don't. For the first time in my life, I feel free. She studied him quietly, seeing not the billionaire who had once stood in arrogance, but a man stripped of pretense, raw and human. So what will you do now? He smiled faintly. I was hoping to keep helping here if you'll let me. Maybe teach the kids a thing or two about business without the corruption this time. She couldn't help but laugh. And in that sound, something inside both of them loosened. They walked inside together, the silence between them comfortable now. The center was empty except for the lingering smell of paint and the soft hum of the heater. He stopped by the mural the children had painted months ago, a massive wall filled with colors and shapes, a patchwork of hope. "Do you ever regret throwing that brick?" he asked, smiling. "Only when I remember how expensive your car was," she teased. He laughed, the sound echoing warmly through the empty hall. "That brick cost me a windshield, but it gave me something I didn't know I needed." "What's that?" "You," he said simply. Her breath caught, the words hanging in the air between them. For a moment the world outside disappeared, the snow, the noise, the past. All that remained was the truth of what they had built together, not just a partnership but a faith that had survived storms. Elena stepped closer, her voice soft. "You've come a long way, Mr. Ashford." "So have you," he said. "Maybe the journey isn't over yet." She smiled, and in that smile was forgiveness, hope, and the quiet promise of something new. Outside, the snow kept falling, wrapping the city in silence. Inside, beneath the glow of the mural, two hearts that had fought through pride, fear, and redemption found a fragile, beautiful peace. Spring returned to Havenbrook not with grand gestures but with quiet grace. The river that had once frozen in silence now glittered beneath the sunlight, and the city's weary gray slowly gave way to color again. Trees along the avenues bloomed with delicate blossoms, and laughter spilled from the open doors of shops and cafes. For the first time in years, Havenbrook felt alive, and at the heart of its rebirth stood the community center, a building that had once been forgotten and was now alive with purpose. Inside, children chased each other through the halls. Volunteers prepared for the annual Festival of Dreams, and the smell of paint, clay, and freshly brewed coffee filled the air. Every wall told a story of struggle, hope, forgiveness, and the people who had refused to give up. In one corner of the main studio, Elena Carter stood with her sleeves rolled up, helping a little girl frame her watercolor of a sunrise. Her laughter was soft and genuine, the kind that came from someone who had weathered storms and learned to dance in the rain. It had been 6 months since Devon Ashford stepped down as CEO of Ashford Enterprises, and in that time, his life had taken on a simplicity he never imagined possible. He still received invitations to board meetings, interviews, and galas, but he rarely accepted any. He found his peace not in marble offices but in community spaces, in mentoring teenagers who dreamed of starting small businesses, in walking to the center every morning with a cup of coffee and no chauffeur in sight. The man who once measured time in profit margins now measured it in smiles and small victories. His relationship with Elena had grown quietly, away from the eyes of reporters and public curiosity. There were no headlines anymore, no scandals, no need for justification. What existed between them was real, built not from attraction or circumstance but from shared battles and mutual respect. They hadn't labeled it. They didn't need to. Some stories didn't require definitions to feel true. That morning, Devon arrived at the center carrying 2 boxes filled with new art kits. When he entered, Elena looked up from her work and smiled. That same disarming smile that had changed everything the day she'd stood in front of his Ferrari. "You're early," she teased. "I've been early every day this week," he replied, setting the boxes down. "Old habits die hard. Those habits used to include speeding through school zones," she said with a playful arch of her brow. He laughed softly. "And look how far I've come." She tilted her head, studying him with quiet fondness. "You really have, Devon." There was warmth in her voice, the kind that made him pause, that reminded him how far they'd both journeyed, from anger to forgiveness, from pride to humility. He had lost an empire but gained something infinitely more valuable: meaning. Later that day, as the children rehearsed for their performances and volunteers finished setting up decorations for the festival, Elena found herself reflecting on how fragile and beautiful life could be. Everything they had built had come from a single act of courage. One impulsive moment when she had thrown a brick not just at a car, but at the arrogance of indifference itself. That act had changed everything. It had awakened a city, transformed a man, and led her down a path she could never have imagined. As evening approached, the festival began. The courtyard outside the center shimmered under strings of lights, and the air filled with music and laughter. Families gathered, local artists displayed their work. and the children performed dances and songs they had spent weeks perfecting. Devon stood at the edge of the crowd watching Elena move gracefully through the gathering, greeting everyone with warmth and humility. Every person she spoke to seemed lighter afterward, as if her presence carried a quiet magic that healed what the world had broken. When the performances ended, Marcus took the stage and tapped the microphone. "Before we wrap up tonight," he announced, "I think it's time we thank the people who made all of this possible. To Elena Carter, who believed that art could save a city, and to Devon Ashford, who proved that redemption isn't a myth, it's a choice." The crowd erupted in applause, and Elena felt her cheeks flush as Devon joined her on stage. She looked at him, smiling through the roar of appreciation, and he smiled back, his gaze steady and full of unspoken emotion. When the cheers died down, Devon stepped to the microphone. His voice, once sharp and commanding, now carried the gentle strength of someone who had learned to listen. "I used to believe that success was about power," he said, "about being the first, the best, the richest. But life has a way of teaching us what really matters. Sometimes it takes losing everything to see what you were missing all along. I met a woman who wasn't afraid to challenge me, to break my pride and show me that kindness can be stronger than any empire. She didn't just change a community. She changed me." He turned toward Elena, his eyes soft but certain. "And if there's one thing I've learned from her, it's that love isn't about grand gestures. It's about showing up, every day, for people, for dreams, for the things that make life worth living." The silence that followed was powerful, the kind of silence that feels sacred. Elena's eyes shimmered with tears, and for a moment, neither of them cared about the cameras or the crowd. The world around them faded, leaving only the two of them standing under the golden light of the evening, surrounded by the echoes of laughter and the faint smell of paint and spring. When the applause returned, it was thunderous, but amid the noise, Devon leaned closer and whispered, "There's something I've been meaning to ask you." She blinked, surprised. "Now, in front of everyone?" He smiled, his expression both nervous and sincere. "Why not? The best things in my life have happened when I stopped planning." Before she could answer, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. The crowd gasped, and Elena's heart nearly stopped. He opened it to reveal a simple ring, elegant and understated, just like her. "Elena Carter," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "You taught me how to be human again. You showed me that forgiveness is stronger than fear, and that love can grow even from broken beginnings. I don't have an empire to offer anymore, but I have a heart that's finally learned what forever means. Will you marry me?" For a long, breathless moment, the world stood still. Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks, and the memories of everything they had endured, every argument, every trial, every moment of faith and doubt, rushed through her like a tide. She looked at the man before her, not the billionaire he once was, but the man he had become, and her voice trembled as she spoke. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, smiling through her tears, "Yes, I will." The crowd erupted in joy, confetti filled the air, and the children cheered louder than anyone else. Devon slipped the ring onto her finger, and the world seemed to dissolve into light. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something better, a hard-won beginning built on truth and courage. That night, as the festival drew to a close and the last of the guests drifted away, Elena and Devon walked through the quiet streets hand in hand. The snow had melted and the air smelled of earth and spring. They didn't need words. Every step between them spoke of the journey they had taken. Two souls once divided by pride and circumstance, now united by understanding and grace. They stopped at the corner of Maple Avenue, the place where it had all begun, the spot where she had once thrown a brick at his Ferrari. The irony made them both laugh, and Devon shook his head, his voice full of quiet wonder. "I still can't believe this is where our story started." Elena smiled, her gaze soft. "Sometimes the worst moments lead us exactly where we're meant to be." He took her hands, his thumb brushing gently against her ring. Then maybe every wrong turn was worth it. They stood there for a while, the city lights glimmering around them, and for the first time, everything felt whole. The past no longer haunted them. It had simply led them home. Years later, when people spoke of Havenbrook's revival, they spoke of two names with reverence: Elena Carter and Devon Ashford. They spoke of how a community center saved a city, how a woman's courage changed a man, and how love, when built on truth, can heal even the deepest wounds. But for Elena and Devon, the legacy they left behind wasn't in articles or awards. It lived in laughter echoing through painted halls, in the eyes of children who believed in dreams, in every mural that told their story without needing words. And every year, when the Festival of Dreams returned, they would stand together beneath the lights, hand in hand, watching the children paint the future. Each brushstroke a reminder that redemption is real, that love is patient, and that sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin with an ordinary act of courage.